Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strausel and Kyle Peterson. And Kim, I wonder what you thought about my little soliloquy there about the 2012 election and entitlements and whether they're fatal for Republicans.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Paul. I mean, I'd go back even further. George W. Bush actually spent some real political capital talking about reforming Social Security, even partial privatization. He didn't get over the finish line. There was too much else going on at that time when he was in the White House, and there was some reticence among Republicans. But this is something that if a politician decides that they're going to really invest something in it, they've got a smart line. I think that they could actually even be rewarded by voters who themselves understand that there is a problem out here, and it's one that's growing. It's not just that we're getting closer to the moment at which Social Security is not going to be able to pay its benefits. But look, we've got an older generation, more of them coming on the rolls all the time, in a country that isn't producing as many babies. This is a long-term problem, and voters get that. And it also depends on what Republicans can offer. People fundamentally, especially in the Republican Party, they might be a little nervous about this issue, but they want to see some good ideas, and they like to hear about proposals that involve more choice, more competition, more flexibility. I mean, does anybody really love the Medicare system? Does anyone really think that it's providing the best health for our seniors? Does anyone think it's keeping up with all the rapid advances that we have in the medical field, which really have the potential to really aid in quality of life, but which at some point the costs are going to be really difficult for government to be able to engage in that? So any kind of proposals that might make that better, sure, I think there's an opening for that. I totally agree that this was not in any way, or at least not, I think, decisive in what Romney did back in 2012. And there's no reason that you can't have a Republican leader who touches on this again. I wouldn't necessarily make it the central feature of my campaign for the presidency, but I think that there is certainly the room there to embrace the topic.
Well, just on a personal note, I am not a Medicare, but I am at an age when I could get it. And I'll have to tell you that it's very hard to find a doctor in Manhattan, New York City, who takes Medicare. If you say you're on Medicare, they say, sorry, can't do it. If you write a check, I'll be okay. I mean, there is that. More and more doctors, because of the low reimbursement rates, just simply don't take Medicare patients. All right, let's talk about what else we learned about Biden's political strategy in the State of the Union. And I think it was actually hiding there in plain sight, working around the theme of finish the job, quote unquote, in which he basically said, full steam ahead. All that I've been proposing before, I'm going to keep proposing. I want it to pass. He says, Republicans, work with me. Please, the American public want us to work together to pass everything that I couldn't get Democrats to pass. So that's what I would describe as bipartisan in name only. He laid out a Democratic agenda. In many ways, a large part of the stuff that Joe Manchin wouldn't vote for, Kyrsten Sinema wouldn't vote for, and certainly has no chance of passing in this Congress. But they're still saying he's going to propose it, not because he thinks that it will pass, but because he wants to use this in the general election going forward, Kyle. And the number one issue I would cite that he ignored, the bipartisanship that didn't bark, if you will, permitting reform, which Joe Manchin was promised to vote on in return for voting for the Inflation Reduction Act as Republican priority. Nada in the State of the Union.
But that faux bipartisanship is why the phrase finish the job strikes me as so strange, because remember, President Biden ran in the 2020 election saying he was going to unify the country. He has not done that. I mean, there were a few bills, the infrastructure bill that passed with bipartisan support, but he has, remember, after getting the nomination, he sat down with Bernie Sanders and hashed out pieces of the agenda that he could take on board, the unilateral forgiving of student loans. I mean, there are a lot of obvious things, I think, that could make for some bipartisan legislation over the next 2 years, and permitting reform is one of them. The permitting sclerosis that we have slows down all sorts of projects. President Biden wants to have 100% clean electricity by 2035. which means that we would have to build a lot more wind farms and solar sites and transmission lines. And there's simply no way that that stuff is going to get done unless you have some changes to permitting reform. And so I don't understand the reluctance on Democratic side, particularly on Joe Biden's side, to wade into that debate. I mean, instead, he is saying finish the job while pointing to a bunch of things that he didn't campaign on in 2020. I mean, I don't think that he was elected in 2020 to crack down on hotel resort fees.
Well, that's actually might be one of the more popular proposals in there. I don't know. People hate these irritants. I think the federal government has no role, in my view, in cracking down on and setting hotel prices. I mean, it's almost absurd. Do you think there's something more important than that, like maybe defending the country against China, or actually finding a way to pay our bills without incurring more and more debt? But he thinks that stuff is popular, and I think you're right. He is going to campaign on that. But Tim, it's just striking to me. I mean, the one area I think you could point to that he mentioned that Republicans have had some interest in was police reform. And he did do a long take on that and said, let's pass it, but no details, no policy specifics, just saying, let's get it done. And of course, the reason it failed the last time was because Tim Scott and Cory Booker were negotiating it, and Democrats walked away because they wanted to impose new mandates on the states and localities, well, and new cash to finance the mandates. There were a couple of other things. But that's why I like Kyle's phrase, faux bipartisanship. The other theme that I think came through to me was left-wing economic populism is going to be part of his campaign. Tax on big oil, a tax on pharma, a tax on corporations, more taxes on corporations, more taxes on billionaires, even though it's actually $100 million, a new wealth tax, which is something that is not merely a tax on income, it's a tax on assets, an unrealized increase in the value of your assets over the course of a year. So that's another theme I think we're going to hear a lot about.
By the way, I think you're being really kind saying that that's why they walked away. The cynical Kim believes that they walked away from policing reform because they wanted to use it as an issue against Republicans in the election and continue to making the claims of racism and that notion that Republicans don't care about criminal justice reform. What was really striking to me were the number of proposals that he just laid out there as if, let's all lock arms and we can get this done, that are ludicrous. They're like non-starters with Republicans. Let's ban semi-automatic weapons. Yeah, well, I can't wait to see Republicans sign up for that one. Let's have a national teacher pay raise. Let's pass a law guaranteeing abortion access. I mean, it was really sort of over the top, this argument. I do agree with you that he's going to run as a lefty populist. In the addition to the things that you mentioned, there was a lot in there that really gets to a problem that Democrats know that they have. They have increasingly been trying to figure out what to do about their working class problem. And that came through in the 2022 midterms. You saw it come out in terms of a lot of polls and exit polls showing that more minority voters had switched over to Republicans. And that's in part because of Republican outreach. But I think some of the really smart commentators, guys like Rui Teixeira, who writes for us at times, have pointed out that this is really more of a working class problem that they have, that a lot of those Hispanics who voted for Republicans come from areas where they do have much more blue collar jobs. And so I think you're going to see a lot more in there that's designed to kind of foment anger out there against wealthy corporations. A lot of things designed to say, look, I got your back in terms of evil credit card companies, et cetera, and to really sort of gin up a sort of class-based fervor, as it was, a populist fervor, along the lines of what Trump does at times. But they're in some ways mimicking him with, as you said, this sort of populist agenda, and it's aimed at trying to get back some of those voters.
Yeah, I think that that's the other angle that I saw. Kyle, I'm going to give you the last word, but this attempt, the Buy American stuff, for example, some of which may be illegal under U.S. trade agreements with all kinds of countries on procurement, but he's throwing it out there, and that's direct from Trump. He's trying to cut into Trump support.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the resort fee, junk fee stuff may be popular, but I think there are all sorts of avenues for opponents to attack that kind of stuff. One of the things he was talking about was banning airlines from charging for seat assignments. Well, that's one way that airlines do price discrimination. And so people who want lower fares can get a flight without a pre-registered seat. And as I understand it, that is basically half of Southwest Airlines' business model, which has allowed them to be a low-cost carrier. And so I think there's avenues for Republicans to attack this kind of stuff if they have a candidate who is interested in doing that and willing to do that, and not 15 candidates on the debate stage that are busy throwing each other under the bus.
All right. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch, and we'll be watching the Joe Biden campaign for re-election tour. Almost 2 years out. It's already here, folks. Thanks for listening to Potomac Watch.